Hi and welcome to this video. Get comfortable because today we're going to be talking about the best books of 2024. These were not books that were released last year, but all books that I enjoyed reading the most. I read 82 books last year and I've compiled a list of the 12 best of them, which was a very challenging thing to do, but I think these books were the most memorable and the best reading experience for me. So I've made a list of 12 books and they are in order. So we're gonna go from least best to best, if that makes sense. We have a lot of books to go through, so let's get started. Okay, coming in at number 12, we have one of the most magical books of this year, which was The Little Prince. The Little Prince, if you've never heard of this book, it's about a little prince who kind of travels the universe and he visits all these different planets and he meets up with different people and different animals. And he kind of just questions everything. He questions what kind of life they're living and why they go through what they go through. The story is quite simple and it can be very much enjoyed by children. It is very thought-provoking, so I think it can be enjoyed as adults as well. I think it's a book that you just revisit every couple of years, and it really, to me, is a timeless classic, so I would highly recommend that you read this if you haven't already. I read The Little Prince for the first time in 2024 and I loved it so much. This book combines the simplicity of a children's book with beautiful and meaningful conversations that are applicable to adults as well. I think this is my definition of a perfect children's book, a book that is very simple in story, but very meaningful and quite deep in conversation. And that's why I think this has made the list of the best books. As you can see, I read this book in French, which was quite a challenge, but I really enjoyed it. And I would love to read more books in French. I feel like a children's book is a great way to start reading in another language because the grammar is quite simple. There were some words that I had to search because you just don't really learn them in school or everyday life, but the grammar was quite simple, so I really enjoyed reading this in French. Also, the illustrations are just so beautiful, and that made me really enjoy this book. So that is number 12 on the list, the first of the best books, The Little Prince. Then on number 12, and this is something that I never imagined I would say, but on number 12, we have a manga, and it's none other than Spy Family. Before 2024, I had never read a manga in my life because the image that I had of mangas and anime and the experience that I had with it was not very positive. I found most manga to be quite inappropriate, and I really don't enjoy that. Then in 2024, I tried my first manga, and it was not the best experience, but I didn't give up, and I'm very happy that I did not because I discovered Spy Family, which I really enjoyed. So this story basically follows Lloyd, who is a spy, and he has to save the world. And in order to complete that mission, he has to get a wife and a kid. But he doesn't know that the wife he marries is an assassin, and he doesn't know that his kid is a telepath. So they hide their identities from each other, but of course the child knows because she can read minds. They go through these missions that are so fun and adorable and just hilarious. So I really enjoyed this manga. I read about 6 volumes this year, which I never expect I would do. But each volume, the plot just thickens, and in each volume, a new character is added, which really keeps the plot going, and I feel like that's what makes the story so enjoyable. I also think the art style is just very beautiful. I just really enjoyed looking at the expressions and the fashion because this manga really does that very well. I honestly thought this manga was really funny, and it kind of brought that heartwarming energy into 2024, which I desperately needed. So I'm really happy that I read this, and I can't wait to continue this series in 2025. Then for number 10, we have a book with a little bit of backstory, because if you followed me this year, you'll know that I took an entire course dedicated to ancient poetry and plays, which exposed me to this whole new world of literature that I had never read from before, and I loved it so much. It also helped that I took the course because then I got to understand a lot more about what was going on, because for me, ancient text and especially poetry is just very new. So I was really happy that I got this course to kind of broaden my understanding of it, and I feel like I learned a lot, which is always nice when you're taking a university course. Also, got to read a lot of amazing work. And one of these works was the Aeneid by Virgil. And before I get into this, can we take a moment to appreciate this beautiful cover? This is the Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition, and I just think it's so beautiful. I love the design and the colors with the golden band around it. I love this edition so much. The only thing is it does have deckled edges, which I'm not a big fan of because just pieces of paper keep flying everywhere. For this university course, I had to write 2 essays, and then I also had to do a recitation of one of the books that we read, and I chose to do part of the Aeneid, which was so challenging because I had to memorize 10 minutes of poetry and I had to perform it, which was very scary, but I think that shows how much I love the Aeneid. So I only memorized, of course, a very small part because this book is quite large. I also think that makes it very intimidating, but I honestly think the text and the translation are very accessible. If you're struggling with poetry, I would recommend that you say the sentences out loud because you really get a clear picture of what's going on and you can kind of imagine the scenario. I feel like it's better understood when you're reading it out loud. So that's my tip for you. But I do understand that this is very intimidating and I'm not sure when I would have read it if it wasn't for this course. So I'm really happy that I got to because it's one of my favorite books of this year. I love this book so much. So if you don't know about this story, it basically follows Aeneas as he's fleeing Troy because Troy is captured by the Greeks and he's fleeing with his father and his son, and he eventually ends up in Rome where he is destined to start the Roman Empire. So this book was commissioned by Augustus to give a divine backstory to the Roman Empire, and Virgil did an amazing job at that. It's such a good story and I loved it so much. But with this course, I also got to see that Virgil implemented a lot of critique on the Roman Empire, and Virgil kind of foreshadowed its demise, which was so interesting to look back on. I believe you can read this book and just enjoy the plot and the story because it's really good, but I just really enjoy the kind of little critiques and foreshadowing and references that Virgil implemented. So that's why this book ended up on my best books of the year. That is the Virgil is the Aeneid by Virgil. Then at number 9 we have The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. This was my first time reading The Lord of the Rings and I read it for the Game of Thrones book club. I had never read The Lord of the Rings before. I had never seen the movies before, so this was my first experience with this story and I just loved it so much. So what I did was, of course, I read the books first and then I immediately watched the movies after because I just got to love these characters so much and the story. And what I especially liked was the nature. My edition of the book had illustrations in it, so I got to see this beautiful nature while I was reading about it. And I actually read the last book while I was in the mountains, so I got to experience this nature while I was there, and that was just an amazing experience and I loved it so much. Probably everyone has read or seen The Lord of the Rings, so I do not need to explain the story to you, but if you haven't, please do so because it's so much fun. Maybe a controversial opinion, but I thought The Two Towers was so good. When I was reading it, that was my favorite one. I just felt like the storyline moved so smoothly in that one. Even though, of course, the most things happen in the first and the last book, I just really enjoyed the middle one. I thought The Two Towers was really well done and the storyline didn't drag at any point. I just really enjoyed it. I found the ending devastating. Prepare yourself for that, but there's also a lot of heartfelt banter. There's also so many fun and cool and funny moments, so I would highly recommend this series. That was book 9. Then for book 8 I picked Chess by Stefan Zweig, which I read at the same time as The Lord of the Rings actually, and it's quite different because just of the size. I think this was very small but very strong, and that's what I need from a short story. It is a very short reading experience, so I think it should stay in your mind for a long time. And this book was definitely thought-provoking. It was very difficult sometimes to read. It deals a lot with trauma and, of course, the game chess. I have played chess since I think I was 6, and I have been in the chess club for a very long time, so I have a kind of a history with the game. This is a very difficult story that combines war trauma with chess. It is very much like The Queen's Gambit, but then with men. And I was just very impressed that this story was able to be told in such a short amount of time. You can definitely read this in one sitting and it will stay with you for a very long time. I love this book so much and I would definitely recommend that you read it. It started raining outside, so I'm not sure if you can hear that, but let's continue. The next book on the list is Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. I'm not sure if I talked about this, but when I read the first 20 pages of Steppenwolf, my jaw was on the floor. I was so amazed at the writing, at the story. I truly felt that there was someone in my brain who was writing this, and I felt so much recognition in this book. I read those pages over and over again. I loved it so much. After that though, the story kind of went downhill for me. I enjoyed it less, and especially the ending. I found it really vague and I think it kind of lost the plot. So I don't think I ended up giving it 5 stars. But at the beginning, I was convinced that this was the book for me, that this was my favorite book of all time. But as I said, it kind of went downhill after that. So Steppenwolf is about this man who feels that he's part man and part wolf. And he really feels isolated from society. And he feels like he cannot relate to any human because of his part wolf. He kind of has this inner battle going on between the wolf and the man. He is just really lonely. And the book is very much about him just feeling completely alienated from society and he doesn't know what to do. Yes, this sounds very depressing. But then he meets someone who feels the same way, who recognizes his loneliness. I think the best way to describe it is they become lonely together. And it's kind of heartwarming, but I do think the story kind of goes downhill at that point. The writing doesn't feel the same as the beginning of the book. Yeah, it is a very difficult story. I would highly recommend that you read this if you're in a good state of mind. I personally really love when it's a little bit more dark and reflective. You're going to see that in a lot of the books I will mention. Yeah, you need to be prepared for that. That being said, I thought it was so meaningful and thought-provoking and I enjoyed it so much. I hadn't read anything like this before and some of the pages really felt like they were straight from my diary, so that was amazing to see. Yeah, you just don't have that connection with every book, so I would not recommend this book to everybody, but I do want to introduce it to you and maybe you can relate to it just as I did. Then number 6 on the list is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This was actually a book that AI picked out for me. I did a video last year where AI picked my reads, which I really want to do again because I found a lot of great books that video. But Rebecca was one of the books that AI picked and it was a 5-star immediately. It was so much fun. It was dark. It was mysterious, but so easy to read. Rebecca follows this unnamed protagonist, which was really interesting, and she marries a recently widowed man called Mr. De Winter, and Mr. De Winter lived with Rebecca, his ex-wife, in this big building. I love books that are focused around a haunted building, and this was one of those books because it was haunted by Rebecca. It was for sure very interesting that the book was named after the deceased person, not after the protagonist. And it really shows how much influence Rebecca still has even though she's dead. We don't know the circumstances surrounding her death, so that was very mysterious and it was very fun to figure that out. I am desperately looking for more books like Rebecca, so if you have any recommendations for books that are like this, that sound like this, then please let me know because I will gladly take them. Then at number 5, ooh, this might be a controversial one, but at number 5 I put The Lady's Paradise by Sola. We read this for the World Tour Book Club hosted by Emma. I think I was one of the few people who enjoyed this book so much, and that was because this book combined everything that I love: economics, consumer behavior, psychology, women's rights, Paris, and I just love the setting. So it's set in one of the first warehouses in Paris, and it kind of shows the beginning of capitalism, and we see how small business owners lose their business because of the big and upcoming warehouses. And we follow Denise, and she is a very poor girl, and she has to provide for her 2 little brothers. So she goes to work for the warehouse. And a lot of people don't agree with this because the warehouse is bringing capitalism to Paris. Small businesses are going out of business because of this warehouse. But Denise does not have another option because she needs to provide. We also have a lot of segments where the owner of the warehouse discusses his strategy and how he gets people to buy more and more, and how he's promoting the idea of capitalism. And I just thought it was so interesting and well done, and I love that it's set in Paris. I understand the critique. It was kind of slow paced and it dragged a little towards the end. The ending was not satisfying at all, but other than that, I love the story so much. I love our main character. I really enjoyed this book. I don't think it's for everybody, but if you're really interested in these topics like I am, then I would highly recommend it, and I think you would really enjoy it. I'm really happy that I read such a book, and I would definitely want to read something like this again. I know Zola has more books in this series. I'm not sure if they're about the same thing, but I will need to check that out in 2025. So yeah, that was The Lady's Paradise. Then the next book on the list is The Dark Interval by Rilke. This book contains more than 20 letters that Rilke has written to his friends that are dealing with grief. These letters are compiled because they contain so much wisdom and so much advice. I feel like Rilke is one of those writers that gives advice that is applicable to anyone in any point of life. I also feel like if you change or your situation changes, you can read this book again and find so many new things that can help you. I really feel like this is applicable to anyone who has dealt with some type of loss. One of the letters is addressed to an Ilse, which is my name, and I was very surprised to see my name in a book because my name usually never gets used because it's of course very specific to the Netherlands and Germany. So I was very happy and surprised to see my name used in this book, especially because it was such a meaningful book. I'm really happy that I read this book, even though the book is quite sad and it's about a really sad topic. It brings me a lot of happiness to see other people can relate to that feeling of sadness and that I'm not alone in this feeling. And to hear Rilke's advice is just very inspiring, very heartwarming. I feel like this book can help you a lot when you're dealing with it, and just knowing that you're not alone is very important when you're dealing with such a tough situation. Okay, my camera just died, so I think it wants me to stop ranting about this book. So let's move on to the top 3 of 2024. So the third spot of the best books of 2024 goes to The Iliad by Homer. As I said, I took the course on epic literature, and The Iliad was one of the books I read. It was actually the first book I read for the course. I tabbed a lot of it, as you can see, because I enjoyed this book so much. And the teacher gave so much background and helpful information to enjoy this book much more. So this book follows the Battle of Troy, and it follows, of course, our Greek heroes Achilles, Patroclus, Agamemnon, and it follows, of course, the gods, which really surprised me because the gods were so human-like. I mean, they had to eat, they had to sleep, they became jealous, they became angry, and reading this was just really special to me because I've always been so intimidated by these books because of their length, because of the language that is used. But by reading this with a group of people in a classroom was so much less intimidating. And the teacher gave us, of course, deadlines that we had to meet each week. I think I read this in 4 weeks and it was really doable. I really enjoyed it. It was much more easy than I expected. Of course, I don't know everything that is referenced. You can read this without having all this knowledge about ancient Greece or all the heroes and all the gods. So the Iliad was much more approachable than I expected it to be, and it was really funny. I loved following these characters. You really feel for these characters, even though they're so far away from you in time and in distance. I really feel like I connected with some of them. I got to write an essay on Helen, which was so interesting, and I thought she was such an amazing and tough character. So I loved writing an essay about Helen. If you want to read this, don't be intimidated. I know you can do this. Then we're moving on to book number 2, which was a big surprise for me. And it was Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Danganronpa. This book is about a little girl who wants to get treated equally to her brother, but unfortunately the culture does not allow for that to happen. Then Zimbabwe gets exposed to Western culture and Western values, and this little girl sees the opportunity to get her education that way. It talks a lot about the differences between African culture and Western culture. I think the writing is what impressed me the most, because this book deals with a lot of difficult topics, but the writing was so accessible and easy and fun to read. So I would highly recommend this book. I'm very happy that I discovered it. I love our main character. She's so fearless and strong and such a great main character. I know that this is part of a trilogy. I don't know if the following books also follow the same characters, but I should check that out because I really enjoyed this first book. I'm really happy that I read it, and it's definitely one of my all-time favorites, I would say. So now's the moment we've been waiting for. My favorite book of 2024 is none other than The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. This was quite the journey. It took me months to finish this book because it's so big. I think it's over 1,200 pages. It was so worth it. And I would definitely want to reread this at some point because the story is just chef's kiss. It's so well crafted and intriguing and mysterious and just so satisfying as well, because this story follows Edmond Dantes, and he is sent to prison for a crime that he did not commit. And when he finally gets out of that prison, he plans his revenge on the people who put him there. So we have a couple of men who envy what Edmund has, and they plot this plan to put him into prison. He suffers there for 14 years. So when he gets out of prison, the world has changed so much, the people have changed so much, and most importantly, he has changed so much, because 14 years is a long time to be locked up alone. The story is so suspenseful. You just want to know what happens. It's such a page turner. I flew through the beginning of this book, then I had to take a little break. That's why it took me months to finish this. But honestly, it's such a suspenseful and fun story. It was definitely one of the highlights of my year. I would recommend anyone to read this. I know the size is very intimidating, but if you find people to read with or plan to read 20 pages each day, you will get there, I promise. And it's so worth it. It's such an amazing book. It really talks about the meaning of life and the meaning of revenge, and when is revenge worth it. So I would highly recommend this. It was such an amazing experience. So that's why The Count of Monte Cristo is my favorite book of 2024. So those were my favorite books of the year. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video and enjoy hearing me rant on about these books. I would love to hear what your favorite books of the year were, so please let me know in the comments. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.